So on to the main event. Fake news kills world. Dr. Richard Milne is a senior lecturer in evolutionary biology at the University of Edinburgh, and he's here to help us challenge some myths about climate change. And I've been reassured that no expertise is necessary. Thank goodness. So over to you, Richard.
Okay, so I think it's time. We're going to start with a brief video before we go to me live. So, Grant, if you could play the video and hope that the gremlins stay away. He's trying to get this.
Hello, I'm Dr. Richard Milne, and this show is all about climate change denial, a very dangerous process, and how we fight against it. We're going to start with a quick trip back in time.
Come back in time and you land on the deck of the Titanic, and miraculously you're in time to prevent the catastrophe. So you open the TARDIS door. No, you don't open the TARDIS door, it's stuck again. But you can shout to the captain through the door, Captain, there's an iceberg, you need to change course. But then another guy turns up and he says, no such thing as icebergs. It's okay, Captain, keep going the way you're going. And you say, yes, icebergs exist. Look, there's one over there. And the guy says, there. It's okay. So maybe icebergs exist, but they're natural and therefore harmless. And you say, icebergs may be natural, but ramming into them with a great big ship isn't. And the guy says, there's been icebergs around for centuries, but none of them has ever sunk a ship this size, therefore we're safe. You say, well, that's because there's never been a ship this size. And he says, well, the people who talk about sinking are all corrupt. You know who talks about sinking a lot? Lifeboat manufacturers, that's who. And you say, it doesn't matter who talks about sinking, it's going to happen unless we change course. He says, oh, right. So hitting the iceberg will sink the ship. But what about all the extra fuel we'd have to spend trying to avoid it? Huh? You thought of that? Huh? And then he says, you know, sinking might not actually be such a bad thing. Everyone talks about it in such a negative way, but actually it'll be very exciting. We'll get lots of exercise, and there'll be some films made about it. And by this time it's too late to hit the iceberg, and so you smash into it, and he still doesn't shut up. Because as the ship's going down, he says, look, the ship isn't sinking. If anything, it's rising. See, it was absolutely nothing to worry about. And as it finally slides to oblivion, he's got one more argument to make. Oh my God, look over there, look over there. Oh my God, it's a complete and utter crisis. There's a boat full of asylum seekers and they're trying to reach Britain. Why isn't anyone doing anything about it? Look over there. Don't think about this boat that's sinking and killing you all. Worry about those 4 people trying to get to Dover. Okay, so clearly this is an analogy for the human race and dangerous climate change and all the various ways in which climate deniers are trying to stop us from doing anything about it. The very last one was an example of misdirection, trying to get people to think about something different. But we've also seen it's no such thing, it's natural, everyone who talks about it is corrupt, it's too expensive to do anything about it, and it's not even a bad thing. Here we see real examples of all of these. What do these sources have in common? They're all very, very right-wing. We can talk about that later if you want to. So the effect of all this is that instead of having this real debate about what we do about the problem, which we should have been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, we have this ridiculous phony debate where a scientist says it's real and then some fossil fuel funded idiot turns up and says no it isn't, and and that just has literally been bouncing back and forth in the media for 20 years because a lot of people think that it's balanced to have one of these idiots up against a scientist. Now, if we look at this issue logically, you'll see that there's a huge amount of evidence for anthropogenic global warming being real, and absolutely none for it being false. But Climate deniers, through their efforts, have changed how a lot of people look at this issue, and they're making us see it like this: follow the gourd versus follow the shoe, as if there's two competing religions and you can choose which one you want to. And as soon as you get people thinking like that, then you've taken them away from the evidence. And one of the reasons you can do this is that in the human mind, the way we see things, perception of facts, can depend a lot on your personal viewpoint. If you don't believe me, watch any World Cup football match, any penalty appeal. You've got people in one coloured shirt, all of whom have seen one thing, which is clearly a penalty, and everyone wearing the other coloured shirt thinks it's clearly not. And this is why right-wing pundits are able to manipulate people of a certain mindset into basically rejecting the scientific evidence. They appeal to the viewpoint rather than talking about actual facts. So what can we do about it? Well, we can look at public opinion, and you can see there's this quarter of the UK public, and it's probably not changed that much, who think it's not real. We could attempt to show them what happens when you get closer to the evidence, that if you ask scientists, the number of people who say no is very much smaller. Climate scientists, only 1.5% of them think that climate change isn't real. And actually, peer-reviewed papers, there's hardly any that reject the consensus whatsoever. So what we can do as individuals is try to target that part of the public that don't know. They're the ones who are actually receptive to reasoned argument and debate. Those who are in the no camp, forget about them, they're closed minds, they're not going to listen. So that's really what this show is going to be about. It's going to be about how we tackle the don't knows and how we shoot down the various arguments of climate deniers. Not when we hear them from a denier themselves, because that's like playing chess with a pigeon. They're not going to play by the rules. But if you talk to someone who's heard one of these arguments and isn't sure if it's valid or not, that's when it's really, really useful to be able to shoot them down. Climate deniers would like you to believe that the science of climate change is actually really, really complicated. It's too complicated for anybody but a climate scientist to understand. Because as soon as people believe that, then they think, well, you know, I can't personally judge whether it's true or not. I just have to decide who I'm going to believe, and then you get back into the follow the gourd, follow the shoe situation. But in actual fact, the basic science is really actually straightforward. Anybody with half a brain can understand it. There's 4 proven facts to it. The first is that carbon dioxide traps heat like a blanket around the planet. The more carbon dioxide you've got, the less energy from the sun escapes back into space, and so the planet gets warmer. We've known that for over 100 years. Secondly, humans emit carbon dioxide. It's an established fact. We take fossil fuels and we burn them, so of course we emit the stuff. And actually, based on just these 2 facts, global warming was predicted during the reign of Queen Victoria. That's a really useful fact, because it rather torpedoes some of the conspiracy theories that it's been invented quite recently. Our third proven fact is increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the air. Since we've had reliable observations just before 1960, it's been going up really very steadily and alarmingly consistently. Our fourth fact is increasing temperatures in the air. Now those are a bit more wobbly and up and downy, because there are other factors that work on a within decade level, like volcanoes. Sunspots and stuff will give you hotter years and colder years, but you can see there's still a steady trend. So all 4 of those are proven facts. Nobody rational disputes them. But that's not enough alone for climate change and for pandemic global warming to be true. There also has to be a causal relationship, 2 causal relationships in fact. First, does the increase of carbon dioxide in the air come from humans emitting carbon dioxide? Well, logically it obviously does. Climate deniers do try to pretend that it's volcanoes or something else causing it, but if that's the case, then where does all the carbon we emit go? We emit 100 times more carbon dioxide per year than do all the world's volcanoes put together. The second causal relationship for climate change to be man-made is that you combine the property of carbon dioxide trapping heat with the increasing amounts of carbon dioxide in the air. Is that what's causing global temperatures to rise? Well, first of all, there's nothing else that could be causing it. Scientists have looked at this in great detail. Secondly, satellites have actually proved that there's less heat escaping the atmosphere before, exactly on the wavelengths that match absorption by methane and carbon dioxide. You can see it here on this graph where you have these pink stalactites. That's a reduction from 1970 to 1997, less energy of those wavelengths leaving the atmosphere than there was before. That's your smoking gun. That is your direct proof that the Earth is warming because of more of these greenhouse gases. So I don't think that's particularly difficult for anybody with half a brain to understand. It takes a little bit of work to memorize it, but it's worth having it there, because for somebody who's genuinely not sure but is open to persuasion, then you can put that as a fairly complete case. It's the current scientific consensus, and it's a testable theory supported by evidence. It has stood up to a huge amount of scrutiny, and it has held firm. Now, in a logical world, a valid counter-argument, it should explain why something in this is wrong, and it should offer an alternative theory that is testable. In reality, what you get is this plethora of counter-arguments, none of which are testable, none of which are backed by evidence, but that's not the intention. The intention behind these is to confuse the public and make them think that maybe it's okay to keep burning fossil fuels at the rate we are. So really what this show is about, well, it's kind of about what you guys want it to be about, but if you want to ask me how do you refute a particular climate denial argument, I'll be happy to do that, and in some quite inventive ways, I hope. So, okay, I'm opening up the floor to you. Okay, so that's the end of the video. So, yep, happy to take questions, points. Basically, if you've heard a climate denial argument, you think, well, that's probably wrong, but I'm not quite sure how to refute it, or maybe you think, oh, maybe that isn't wrong, maybe there actually is a flaw in the science, then really that's what we're here for, to actually sort of really get into this and take down individual arguments, but get you into the frame of mind where you can take down any argument. And one way to do it is just by having those 4 facts and the 2 causal relationships. But the other is just training yourself with a bit of critical thinking. When someone comes up with a counter argument, to be able to just see the logical flaw in it and point it out. So if you have a specific one, I will take it now. Hello, Helen.
Hi, Richard. I was watching through that video, and I'm not a scientific person. I have an arts and culture background, and so I do want to, I feel a bit overwhelmed by all stats and statistics and things like that, and I'm not driven by understanding numbers and science. How do you talk to me in a way that, it's not that I don't believe you, but there's plenty of people like me who say, I don't understand it, I can't repeat that back.
Yeah, okay. Well, you start with the very simple science, which is that putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is like putting another jumper on or putting another blanket on your bed. It's basically what it does. The more of the stuff there is, the less heat escapes into space. And so the warmer the planet gets. And that's the basic science. And I guess that's where you start. And you could just build gradually outwards from that, but and that's the core of it. That's what's been known since the reign of Queen Victoria, and I think yeah, I think anybody should be capable of understanding that. I don't think you don't need to think numbers. You don't need to be a scientist. You just, yeah, I think anyone who's at all engaged will be able to follow that. And you can kind of build to it until their eyes start glazing over and you think, okay, that's, yeah. And trust me, my eyes glaze over pretty quickly when people talk to me about technical stuff, about computers and things like that. So, yeah, we all have our limits on different topics. And yeah, the trick is
Yeah.
to start at the simplest level and then build up from that. We've got a couple of questions here. Big climate denier is Trump plus his base. Is there a way of using your illustration to convince him? Well, in the case of Trump and the case of his base, the answer is no. There are always going to be people with very, very closed minds. And yeah, there's a core of people you can't get through to. You need to get through to those people in the middle who are not sure. Yeah, there's no getting through to Trump and people who fanatically support him. Anyone who supports Trump after what we've seen for the last 4 years is not a rational person, unfortunately. But there may be people who they've heard him or one of his fans say this, that, or the other, and you can take down those arguments in a way that deals with the logic rather than attacking the person. What about the jobs we'll lose if we stop fossil fuels? That's a very, very good point from Marcus. Two things to say about that. The first is climate deniers like to blend science with politics and treat them as if they're one thing. So the first thing you say is, well, you've got two issues here. One is the science, is it real? And the answer to that is clearly yes, it is. The second is, what do we do about it? And that's the debate we should have been having. It came up briefly in the video. And it's a debate that has been stymied by the fact that climate deniers have been trying to keep the debate on, is it real, instead of what do we do about it? And there are right-wing solutions to this. It's just that right-wingers have got hung up on denying it. The right-wing market-based solutions. And you've probably heard, a lot of people talking about green recovery from COVID more recently. But I think that's where to go when you hear this argument. First, you say, well, the science is true. So how do we, what do we do, knowing that the science is true, but we don't want to lose jobs? And the answer is, you put a lot of money into renewables, you put a lot of money into technologies like batteries, developing better batteries, electric cars, and to basically invest, spend on building a carbon neutral economy. And also look at the amount of subsidies that are going into fossil fuels. And a lot of that money just goes into the pockets of the very, very rich. We need subsidies for renewables that spread widely and create jobs. Oh yes, well, another one that Marcus has heard. He's very keen to say, yes, I've heard it, it's not what I think. And yes, I agree, Marcus, that's a good thing to point out. People saying, why should I give up this, that, or the other driving when I'll be dead before this hits? Well, I would say, do you have children? To someone who came up with that. And it is a very selfish argument. It's I personally view people who'll be alive in 50 years' time in the same way I might view people I've never met who live on another continent, or indeed live in the same city as me that I've never met. They're still people. The fact that people in the future or people now, I don't see that difference in that. Really, you either care about people or you don't. That's how I would respond to that and say, if you're making your contribution to dealing with this problem, then you're doing it because you care about people. Now or later, I don't see so much of a difference.
Sorry, Richard, just on that, you're talking about not caring about people. What do you think? I think I've heard as well, don't believe, but I've heard that young people, it's going to happen so slowly that, and the young people will adjust, and that actually, you know, they're going to be fine in the future because they're developing the technology and the mitigating solutions to anything.
Yes, yes. I suppose that's the same as telling someone who's smoking 100 cigarettes a day, it's fine, keep on smoking because they'll probably develop a cancer curing bullet by the time you've got lung cancer. So it's all right. Well, the first thing to say is it's not happening slowly anymore. It's starting to happen quite fast. We saw Australia was all on fire over the Christmas period, so it's not actually happening that slowly. And as far as adjusting is concerned, well, I mean, again, you look at the fires in Australia, you look at the extreme weather that's happening all over the place, and I don't think we are adjusting. If we had nothing else to deal with, if we had no other problems in the world at all, and everyone took this problem seriously, then perhaps we as human beings could adapt. But it's not just us, you know. If we're concentrating on just adapting ourselves, then meanwhile the natural world is dying out. The rainforests in South American rainforests will largely disappear if climate change continues at the rate it is, because they won't be able to exist in a hotter world. The ice caps will melt and the sea levels will rise. If we're going to adjust to that, it's going to be by living on floating cities, where we don't actually have the opportunity to go walking anywhere other than man-made terrains. So yeah, you're getting into a quality of life thing then, and I think that's yes. I mean, we can adjust to almost anything, but and often it's the case that not everyone can adjust. Those people who are rich and have resources, those countries that are richer and have resources, they can adjust. People in poor countries, and poor people generally, they can't adjust. They don't have the resources. So I guess that's how I would tackle that one. Now I've got whether I can explain the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade. That's a really technical question from maybe there. So I can't actually give you a precise answer to that one, only that the more you warm the earth, the more of these effects you'll get. But you're getting into the very complicated areas of the science. I suppose you could say, using a lung cancer analogy, it's the difference between smoking 15 cigarettes a day and 20 cigarettes a day for your chances of getting lung cancer and other smoking related diseases. You've got Bob Downey. I know that climate deniers exist, but why? Ah, yes, that's a whole 20-minute talk on its own. That I'll go through it as briefly as I can. There are a small number of individuals who are paid to do this by fossil fuel companies and other vested interests who are paid to spread this sort of thing. There's very few of them, but they're highly motivated and extremely influential. Then you've got a second sort of larger group of people who are driven by ideology. And you look across right-wing politicians, right-wing pundits, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage. It correlates very tightly with right-wing views, support for Brexit, support for Trump. And again, then the answer comes back, why? I think, yeah, there's a right-wing politics didn't used to be like this, but it has been polluted by sort of this desire to, instead of thinking about sort of individual freedoms and market-based solutions, which is what right-wing politics should be, it's become increasingly about denying unpleasant realities. And people think the free market is so important. It's a lot of these people, they view the laws of economics as being the fundamental law of the universe, and the laws of nature just have to work around that as best they can. And anything that interferes with the free market, it can't be true, because their belief in the free market is absolute, and therefore they deny it. There's also, if you've got some people, they start from a position of, I want this to be true, I don't want that to be true. If you're a scientist, you start with a viewpoint of, well, I don't know what's true. I'm going to examine the evidence and find out. But if you're an evolution denier, if you're a coronavirus denier, if you're a climate denier, you start off with a viewpoint, well, I don't want this to be true. Therefore, it isn't true. And I'm only going to accept evidence that fits my preconceived viewpoint. And everything sort of stems from that. And that ends up being how they not only they come up with these arguments, they actually believe them because they support this position, which they, in their minds, they, for whatever reason, they feel this has to be true. Then you've got the third group of people, which is those who are motivated by fear. And this, in an emotional level, it's an extremely rational thing. We've all done it at times in our lives. You don't want something to be true because it's scary. So if you were a kid and you had a toothache and you were scared of the dentist, you pretend to your parents, no, I don't have a toothache. Oh, I don't have a toothache because I don't want to visit the dentist. And kind of that sort of, so you're denying a fact on a personal level simply because you don't want to deal with the consequences of that fact. If you know you're Harry Potter, Cornelius Fudge at the end of book 4 and for the whole of book 5, he's in total denial about Voldemort being back, and the whole plot of book 5 is driven by that denial. So when you present an ordinary member of the public with the idea that the planet's going to get hotter and hotter and things are going to get worse and worse for them and for their children and for their grandchildren, well, I don't want to believe it. No rational person is going to want to believe that. And I can understand why people, they'll see some person writing in a newspaper saying, it's all right, it's not real because X, Y, and Z. And yeah, the emotionally, you want to believe that that's not true. And you want to believe that you can drive your car, you can jump on a plane to New York for a shopping trip for 2 days without harming the planet. It's something anybody is going to want to believe. And people in that category, you don't want to call them stupid. You don't even want to call them selfish. You just want to gently try and persuade them that unfortunately the science says this and the science is extremely strong. We want, and also kind of, yeah, once you've got someone believing the science, then you can say, well, dealing with it, take baby steps. Look at everything you do in your life that involves carbon emissions. And there are things you can change that have a big impact that don't actually, won't change your lifestyle that much. So walk to the shops instead of driving, take fewer flights, have maybe one long foreign holiday instead of 3 short ones. And then you've massively cut your carbon emissions. And actually, you've not changed your quality of life at all, or maybe you've even made it better. So yeah, that's sort of that's a very long answer to a fairly short question, but hopefully I've covered a bit of ground there. So let's move on. We've got Mady asking, when the time critical comes, how can we impose measures? Yes, so that's linking it to COVID-19, how suddenly all these people, all these governments saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, no. COVID comes along and suddenly you can do that, you can do this, you can spend huge amounts of government money when previously they didn't have any. The thing with climate change is because it's coming along so slowly, whereas the COVID came so fast. It's like the gradually boiling of the frog in the movie An Inconvenient Truth, which I think was possibly the best analogy in that movie. How do we get governments to take this massive action? Well, I think the Canadian government, Trudeau, is talking about using coming out of coronavirus to change how we do things, a big green recovery. And I've also seen an article somewhere about something called a Skywalker window. This is a Star Wars analogy for waiting for a particular point in time when you can get something, you can do something that you wouldn't normally be able to do, which in the film, of course, is destroy the Death Star. But if you Google Skywalker window, you can find more about this. But to wait for and look for points in time when you can really come out campaign, get the government to do a big change. And yeah, the end of the coronavirus period is one such time. The trouble is, we've got an absolutely rubbish government at the moment, so it may not happen. But that's what I'd say to that, I think. So we'll go. Aye, certain important crops won't grow at temperatures higher than current averages, such as corn. Well, yes, that's a potential issue that we may face. That as the world warms up, we may have trouble growing crops. Then you get into a debate about genetic modification and what you do to keep the world fed. I personally don't have a problem with genetic modification. I just view it as a tool, same as any other. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be used in a way that reduces the harm to the planet or that increases it. But also, I think permaculture solutions can be used, growing lots of different plants together. You can actually create an environment where things would grow that wouldn't grow if you tried to grow them on their own. You can design your farm area in a way that preserves water. So you can actually grow things in semi-desert countries. If you plant the right plants in the right way, you can grow things that otherwise you wouldn't have been able to grow. So I think as a purely adaptation measure, I think you can get around that. You need to use intelligent thinking. Now, Stephen Wright says, if you were Prime Minister and or First Minister, what three things would you do first? Well, I know Stephen, he could have warned me about that question beforehand, but he chose not to. Right, well, I mean, if I were Boris Johnson, the first thing I'd do was resign, but let's go past that and think. So if I were, immediately I would end all subsidies for fossil fuels or phase them out completely over as short a period as possible. I would plough huge amounts of money into renewables. I would basically want every suitable roof in Britain to have solar panels on it. I would make the funding available for that to happen. I would get our country to a point where we are a net exporter of electricity, and we're using no fossil fuels at all to power ourselves as fast as I possibly could. I would put measures in place to minimize flying to only when people really need it. And I'd include the odd holiday in that, but what I would try to phase out as fast as possible is, like, even during the middle of the coronavirus crisis, there were planes full of people flying from Belfast to London and back again. Apparently, these were mainly construction workers who work in London but live in Belfast, or vice versa. I can't really remember. Even during the coronavirus crisis, they were still flying back and forth. And that's utter lunacy. And it comes back to the point I made earlier about how our society in general often behaves as if the laws of economics are the fundamental laws of the universe, and that every natural law has to work around them as best it can. And yeah, I think flying should really be for people who have a really good reason to want to go somewhere for a decent amount of time. So if you're going somewhere for a meeting and then flying back the same day, I think that's ridiculous. Especially, I think from now on that should be done online. But if you're going on holiday once or twice a year, I think our society can cope with that much flying. What it can't cope with is people literally commuting by plane. That's got to stop. So I would stop that. I would kill subsidies for fossil fuels. I would put tax on all fossil fuel burning, no matter what, including planes, including boats. And I would put massive subsidies on renewables. Okay, we've run out. Oh no, we haven't. We've got a few. We've got two more. One of them's gone. Bob Downey. I only rarely find climate deniers in my friendship group to confront. That's because you've got good taste in friends, Bob. However, many of my friends feel they have a right to drive where they want, a right to one or more foreign holidays a year. Okay, yeah, that's. I say I don't think I mean, yeah, it's about. I don't think we want to be telling our friends to put on hair shirts and completely give up burning fossil fuels. Yeah, as I say, I think my wife is Estonian, so if we want to visit her parents, then we have to get on a plane because it takes 2 days to get there overland. Um, but yes, I think if you've got a friend who flies to New York 5 times a year to go shopping, I would sort of that would earn a Paddington hard stare. But again, once or twice a year on a foreign holiday, I think if we start criticizing people for that, then we're just going to lose. We need to pluck the low hanging fruit, and ultimately, I think yeah, who you vote for, I think is often more important than that. So yeah, it's about lifestyle changes just without giving up everything. And it's not about saying you've not got a right to drive there, but just it, if they're aware that every time they drive, that does release carbon dioxide, and there is a cost to that to be shared by every human being on the planet, then hopefully they'll say, well, I can drive here. I'm going to drive off to so and such a place, but maybe only once or twice this year instead of 5 or 6 times. Just that, just trying to get them to see that balance. But yeah, you don't want to be telling them you should do this because, or not, you should not do this because climate change, or you should not do this because then I'll disapprove of you. You want to be getting them to think, okay, whenever I get behind the car and I drive, I am contributing to climate change. That's and just subtly move them in that direction, because ultimately no one likes being told what to do. It is inherent in the human psyche that we don't like being told what to do. It's really, you want to be giving them sort of you want to just get them to the point where the information is in their minds and accepted, and it's affecting the decisions that they make. That's how I would deal with that.
Richard, just Helen popping in
Yeah.
here.
Hello.
What I mean, I'm listening to all of these things, and I'm kind of, part of me, I think what you said there is that people don't like being told what to do, and there's been, regardless, of whether it's what you're saying is true or good for them or not, there is a reaction, particularly from well-educated white middle class experts who like to pronounce policy decisions and affect other people's lives. And in a way, there is, just as people accept that Trump is a liar, and they say, yes, he is a liar, and you ask, will you vote for him? They go, yeah, because we know he's a liar, and that's an honest thing, right? So we're going in a circle in some way, and there's a reaction against experts now. And I think, when you're talking about people with half a brain and all that, and you go, well, actually, people are coming from different places. How do you, acknowledge a different perspective, or maybe, someone's reacting not rationally but irrationally because we're human beings?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you just have to go back. Well, these are the facts. These are facts about climate change. The planet is going to warm, and it's going to warm it's going to continue warming unless we cut emissions. And whether you believe that or not, it's still going to happen. It is. I think it's something that much finer minds than I are grappling with right now. This phenomenon of leaders in the new sense of the world just completely and openly lying. I think I think the progressive politicians the world over are currently struggling with how to tackle that. So
Yeah.
I think sometimes people's own lives are being destroyed by the very people they support, and yet still they support them. And yeah, I don't think I have an answer to that at the moment.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinarily difficult one.
We have a question from Douglas.
Oh, hello, Douglas. Oh, yes. Ah, nuclear power. Yeah, yes, nuclear power. That's a really thorny one, and I'm sort of on the fence about it because I think pound for kilowatt for kilowatt, if I had to have one or the other, I'd choose nuclear power. Um, because although I completely agree it's dangerous, I don't think it's as dangerous as fossil fuels. Of course, I mean, the difference is that nuclear power, if it's done sensibly and very competently, then you can run a nuclear power station without any harm being done at all. If it's run incompetently, then you can do incredible damage. If you put it on the coast in an earthquake zone, as happened with Fukushima, or if you just run it not very well or too long, as it was Chernobyl. So yes, what I wouldn't be doing at this time is decommissioning nuclear power stations before their time, just because we've got such a serious problem with carbon dioxide. But at the same time, if I had money to invest, it would all be going into renewables and not nuclear power. So I guess that's the answer. I wouldn't be rushing to decommission nuclear power stations, which I think happened in Germany after Fukushima. But nor would I be building new ones. I would be spending the money on renewables.
Do you have, so Helen here again, do you have any examples? I mean, so, what action is the most effective in creating real policy change? Do you have any examples? I know you to say campaigning, but actually people campaign and nothing changes. And so do you know of any examples around the world where something's really been successful?
Well, if enough people get out on the street and campaign, then sometimes policy will change. We saw that with the A-level results. There's this 3.5% thing going around that if you're on Twitter, you've probably seen it. If enough people stand up and protest, then governments will change course. It clearly needs to be more than 2 million because the anti-Brexit protests had that many people on the streets, and that didn't change anything. I think it needs to be. It does need to be. It needs to be for more than a day. It needs to be sustained. But I think you also have to think carefully about not pissing too many people off. So, Extinction Rebellion, they had some very good protests, but there was one point when they shut down London transport system, which I thought was totally counterproductive. It pissed a lot of people off, but it also would have driven people into their cars. So that's not what's going to work. Again, if there were simple answers to this, then everyone would be doing it. I think you need a critical mass of people, and you need to protest in a way that brings more people with you than it does against you. You need to vote, and you need to really think when you're voting about not letting the climate denying parties into power.
We have a question from one from Bob again and one from Greg, and I think Greg's one would be good
Yep.
as you wind down. Well, actually, both of them are very good.
Yeah.
I think these are the last two questions, possibly. If you want another question, quickly.
Okay. Well, I'll do Greg's first.
Yeah.
The individual changes. Yes. Well, first of all, individual changes. I mean, I think obviously, as an individual, if you change, then that seems like a drop in the ocean when there are 7 billion of us. But then if large numbers of people are changing their behaviour, then that has an effect on society. It has an effect on how the economy functions. So yeah, if a large number of people stop taking internal flights, for example, then those flights will disappear, and that can also influence government policy. I think the same is true on an international level. That the point about if China's not doing it, why should we? That's classic American argument, although these days America is now worse than China in most ways, not always, but most ways. I'm not a Christian, but if you go back to the life of Jesus and the idea of turning the other cheek, if I turn the other cheek and somebody whacks me around the face, that's not going to do much to stop world violence. But then Jesus thought that it was the way to start. So there is that thing of, if a country sets an example, if a country shows that something's possible. I mean, if we, as Britain, got ourselves a better prime minister and we showed that in 5 years you can go to a completely carbon neutral or even carbon positive economy, then you're demonstrating to other bigger countries that actually this can be done, and it can be done quite fast in a way that creates jobs. And so if we as individuals take steps, I encourage the government to take steps, elect a government that will take steps, and then that in turn serves as an example for larger countries that it can be done. Bob asked about waste disposal, which I assume he's talking about nuclear power, where, how, and for how long. I'm not an expert on this, but the where is somewhere that's extremely geologically stable. So you've got to be well away from any kind of geological faults, and you've got to be in a sort of rock that is not permeable, so the stuff can't seep out. And for how long? Well, pretty much forever on human time scales, I would suggest.
Okay, so the last question I'd like you to kind of just have a think about.
Yeah.
Okay, there's two things. One, how do you play chess with a pigeon?
Oh, right, yeah.
And well, secondly, how do you talk? I think it's important not to humiliate people.
Oh, absolutely.
Or put people in a corner when you're talking to them in any scenario.
Yeah.
So how might you approach that?
Okay, so these questions are actually about two sides of the same thing. They're kind of dealing with opposites. So the chess with pigeons is about what happens when you come up against an actual dyed-in-the-wool climate denier. And I use an analogy for that, which is imagine that you're Garry Kasparov and you get this anonymous email. Somebody wants to challenge you to a game of chess. And if he wins, he gets to say that he's the greatest chess player in the world because he's beaten Garry Kasparov. If he loses, he'll give £1 million to charity of your choice. So you say, all right, I'll take you on. And you're invited to this building and you walk into a closed room with a chessboard in it. And who is this person turn out to be? He turns out to be Donald Trump. I'm the greatest chess player in the world. I'm the greatest man. I've got the best pawns. I've got the best knights. And so the game begins, and about 10 moves in, Trump does. Hang on. Oh. Here we go. Here we are. Yeah, Trump does that. Sweeps all the pieces off the board. And
Hello, Richard. We lost you. You fell over your chessboard.
I did. Well, no, the camera.
Are you with us?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I've lost the camera. I have no idea why. So you have to live without my ugly mug. So that's the first question. The second is the opposite. Is instead of the moral of that Trump story is that you can't play chess against Donald Trump because he'll cheat. You can't play chess against a pigeon because it'll shit all over the board and fly off home. Climate deniers don't play by the rules, so there's no point debating them. But the exact opposite scenario is when you come up against an ordinary member of the public who has heard, perhaps, that maybe he or she has heard, oh, well, somebody said, I heard that it's all the sun causing climate change, so it's all right. We don't need to worry about it after all. Now, I once made this mistake with my Australian uncle, and he'd forwarded on this list of climate denial arguments, and I'd had a really bad day. I saw this email, I saw red. I saw red, really, 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 really angry. Oh, hold on. Let's try that. Hey, I'm back. Hey, you can see me. Don't know if that's a good thing, but you can. So yeah, so I saw red in this email, and I wrote a blistering rebuttal of every point, and I hit reply to all of the 45 people that he'd sent it to, which is not really, it was a really, really nasty thing to do in retrospect, and undeserved. So that's what you don't do. What you do is you remember the distinction between the deceivers and the deceived, first of all. The people who make up these climate denial lies, they're extremely clever, they're extremely motivated, they test these things, and they come out with lies that they know people are going to believe, because as Helen has pointed out, most of us are not scientists, and they use lies that are very believable. You remember that none of us gets through life without being lied to and tricked from time to time. People who believe these things are not dumb, they're just not trained scientists. So you've got to come at it. You've got to assume, okay, you say, okay, so this is a common argument. It's a lot of people believe it, but it's actually a very, very clever bit of deception, and the reason it's wrong is such and such and so and so. So that's kind of how you go about it. You remember, firstly and most importantly, that in a way the person you're talking to is a victim. They have been lied to, they have been tricked, and you're on their side, but you don't patronize them, because I could equally be fooled by somebody might tell me something about history, or something about how to fix your computer, and I would believe it because I don't know much about these things. And likewise, a very cleverly constructed lie about science is going to take in a lot of people who aren't climate scientists. So you think, yeah, you put yourselves in their position on an emotional level. They've been lied to.
Thank you, Richard. And on that note, I have to say, I have missed the chaos and and the general kind of frivolity and joy of the Fringe, and your presentation has brought some of that back. It's very hard to do it online. I'm delighted. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. So on behalf of Just Festival, I want to thank you very much. And I also would like to point out one event that's happening tomorrow night, just to plug something else that's going on. And yes, you can put your Trump hair back on while I'm talking. I'd like to point out No Direction Home is a refugee and migrant stand-up comedy collective. And so I hope you can join us tomorrow night for that. That will be really special and really good. So again, thank you all for coming, and good afternoon.